The silence in the chapel was a heavy, suffocating thing, broken only by the soft rustle of dark clothing and the choked-back sobs that filled the air. A faint scent of old cologne mingled with the palpable weight of sorrow as they all gathered to say a final farewell to a true hero. In the center of the aisle, beneath stained glass windows that filtered the soft morning light, rested a coffin of sturdy dark wood. Upon it, a carefully folded flag lay, an enduring symbol of honor and sacrifice. But for those who knew João Oliveira, none of this felt right. He had faced explosions, ambushes, and cold nights in the desert, only to end up here. Cold, lifeless, and without a proper farewell. His comrades stood in a rigid formation, their faces impassive, their jaws tight, unwilling to break the silence, though their eyes betrayed the profound pain they felt. In the front row, a woman with neatly coiffed brown hair clutched a damp handkerchief in her trembling fingers. Larissa, his sister, was lost in her grief, but no one in the room seemed to feel the loss as acutely as Rex, the German shepherd waiting by the chapel door. With his leash held firmly in an officer's hand, Rex's chest rose and fell in rapid pants, as if he sensed that something was terribly, fundamentally wrong, even without knowing why. He sniffed the air, his gaze sweeping the room for a clue. Then, as his deep brown eyes locked onto the coffin, something inside him shifted. He went still, ears pricked, his stare fixed on João's silent form. Suddenly, without warning, he did what no one expected. With a desperate tug, Rex broke free from the officer's grip, the sharp click of his nails echoing on the polished floor as he bolted down the aisle. Before anyone could react, he sprang onto the coffin, and gasps rippled through the chapel. The impact made the flag shift slightly, and for a fleeting moment, it was as if João might stir. Rex curled up on the soldier's chest, sniffing frantically as if searching for any sign of life, letting out a soft whine thick with sorrow and longing before resting his head on João's shoulder and closing his eyes. Then, something happened that made everyone in the chapel hold their breath, a moment so moving that no eye remained dry. The chapel was once again gripped by a chest-tightening silence. There Rex remained on João's still body, his head resting gently, as if trying to will his friend to wake. His body trembled slightly, his ears twitching at the soft echo of sobs around him. Trained for war, for danger, for obedience, Rex could never have been prepared for this. His partner, his handler, his entire world was gone, and he couldn't understand why. A choked sob escaped Larissa as she gripped the edge of the pew, her face pale, her eyes swollen from weeping. Around her, the soldiers remained motionless, their dress uniforms immaculate, their hands clasped tightly. They had fought alongside João, seen him face the worst and come back, but nothing had prepared them for the sight of Rex curled against him, stubbornly refusing to let go. An officer approached cautiously, reaching for Rex's collar. The dog let out a low, rumbling growl, not of aggression, but of fierce protection. As if to anchor himself to the man who meant everything, Rex's claws dug into the fabric of the uniform beneath him. The officer hesitated, then slowly backed away. No one here had the heart to force him. "Let him be," Chaplain Carlos murmured, his voice soft but firm, heavy with a sad resignation. "He is grieving, just as we all are." Larissa wiped at her tears, thousands with trembling fingers. "He doesn't understand," she whispered, her voice cracking. "He thinks João is coming back." The words hung in the air, suffocating. Rex let out another soft whine and nudged his snout against Joao's arm, just as he used to do on the battlefield when his master fell, a silent plea to get up. But there was no response. Suddenly, Rex's entire body went rigid. His ears shot up, his breathing grew short. He lifted his head slightly, his dark eyes fixed on something in the distance, something no one else could see. A chill, subtle but undeniable, swept through the room, making the hairs on Larissa's neck stand on end. Rex wasn't just looking. He was watching something invisible. Larissa swallowed hard, her gaze flickering between the chaplain and Rex. "What is it, boy?" she whispered. But the dog didn't respond, his stare remaining intense and unbroken. A cold hush fell over the chapel as Rex remained completely still, his body tense. The heavy air of mourning was now mingled with an inexplicable tension. Larissa wiped her damp face and followed Rex's gaze, but there was nothing there. Only the coffin, the flag, and the flickering candlelight. Her heart began to race as the other soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't normal. Rex was a trained K9. He wouldn't react like this unless something was truly there. Sergeant Marcos, who had served overseas with João, cleared his throat. "What's he looking at?" he asked, his voice low, tinged with a mixture of awe and reverence. No one answered. The silence stretched. Rex didn't blink. His breath held steady, as if he were concentrating on a presence the rest of them couldn't perceive. Then, just as suddenly, he let out a soft whimper. It wasn't the cry of grief from before, but a sound of questioning. His tail gave a tentative twitch. He lifted his head a fraction more, ears swiveling as if listening to something far away. Then his posture relaxed just enough for everyone to notice. "Rex," Larissa breathed, her voice choked with emotion as she took a hesitant step forward. But the dog didn't react. For a moment, he seemed absent, lost in a place where sorrow held no weight, a space beyond the funeral, perhaps beyond death itself. Chaplain Carlos took a deep breath, his hands tightening around his small Bible. His face was unreadable, though his fingers trembled slightly as he murmured, almost to himself, "The dogs, they see what we cannot." His words sent a ripple of unease through the room. A few soldiers shifted on their feet. Others stood frozen, watching Rex with a curiosity now laced with a kind of reverent fear. And then, as quickly as it had begun, it was over. Rex blinked, let out a long, slow sigh, and his posture softened completely. His tail curled gently at his side. He turned his head to look one last time at Joao's face before lowering it again to rest upon the coffin. The room remained utterly still, as if everyone were waiting for something more, but nothing came. Larissa took a shaky breath and moved closer, running her fingers gently through Rex's fur. The dog didn't flinch or resist. It seemed that whatever he had seen, if he had seen anything at all, had passed. But that strange, indefinable feeling still lingered in the air, a silent question no one dared to ask. As the dense silence continued, Rex lay against Joao's still form, his breathing now calm and even, as if the full weight of his sorrow had finally settled upon him. Larissa knelt beside the coffin, her fingers still tangled in Rex's fur, her own chest rising and falling in ragged breaths. She had spent days trying to accept that her brother was gone, but watching Rex share that pain made the loss feel fresh all over again. She wanted to tell him it would be okay, but the words wouldn't come. How could she promise that, when she wasn't sure herself? Sergeant Marcos cleared his throat again, his voice thick. "Rex has never acted like this before," he said, his eyes shifting between the dog and Joao's body, a deep question etched on his face. The other soldiers nodded in silent agreement. They had seen Rex in battle, fierce, disciplined, ever vigilant. Now he just seemed lost, a sight for which none of them were prepared. Chaplain Carlos shifted uncomfortably. "Dogs do not weep as we do," he murmured, clutching his Bible. "But they understand loss. Sometimes it takes them longer to let go than we can imagine." His voice trailed off into the silence. Then, almost reluctantly, Rex slowly lifted his head to look at Joao's face. He let out one last, soft whine, nudged his nose against the wood of the coffin, and in a single, fluid motion, he pushed himself up and sat at attention, ears erect. He looked as if he were awaiting an order, a command, permission to leave his post. Larissa held her breath, turning to the chaplain. She started, but couldn't finish. The chaplain understood. He exhaled slowly, his eyes softening as he looked at Rex. Then, in a low, steady voice, he said, "It's all right, boy. You can stand down." Rex's ears twitched. His eyes remained fixed on Joao's face for a long, heart-wrenching moment. Then his muscles relaxed. His tail untucked slightly, and his breathing eased, as if he had finally received the release he was waiting for. Larissa pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. As the soldiers watched in silence, Rex lowered his head one last time, not in expectation, but in farewell. The weight of the moment was almost unbearable, something deeper than sorrow. It was the space just before goodbye, a reverence that seemed to slow time itself. Rex, once so rigid in his vigil, now seemed relaxed, though his eyes remained open. Larissa stayed by his side, her hand still resting on his back. Her own tears had dried, not from a lack of pain, but because she had none left to shed. All her life she had believed death was an end. But watching Rex's silent devotion, she began to wonder. Perhaps a love that true, that unbreakable, did not simply vanish. Sergeant Marcos, a few feet away, let out a heavy sigh. He had seen men break in battle, seen soldiers fall to the weight of loss, but nothing had prepared him for this. His throat tight, he stepped forward and laid a firm, gentle hand on Rex's back. The dog didn't move, simply breathed slowly, as if savoring every last second beside his fallen partner. The chaplain, his voice composed despite the emotion in the room, spoke softly. Rex's duty was always to protect João. Now he's ensuring he makes it home safely. Larissa bit her lip, her heart aching at the truth in his words. Rex had been by João's side through every danger. Even now, in death, he refused to leave him. The officer who had brought Rex hesitated, then took a deep breath as he reached for the dog's leash. "Come on, pal," he whispered gently. "It's time." For a long moment, Rex seemed to resist, his body still pressed against the coffin, as if he could hold on just a little longer. Then, as if sensing the inevitable, he let out a deep sigh. His ears flickered, his tail gave a slight thump, and he finally moved. Larissa held her breath as Rex lifted his head, his eyes on João's face, searching for something. A memory, a final goodbye. With one last, gentle nudge against the coffin, Rex stepped away. His movement was slow, hesitant, but resolute. He wasn't being dragged. He was choosing to let go. The silence in the chapel deepened as Rex walked away and the soldiers straightened their postures. Larissa brought a trembling hand to her lips. Even the chaplain bowed his head in a silent prayer. Rex padded over to Larissa's feet and sat, his head held high, his body still. He would see his duty through. The great doors of the chapel creaked open, letting in a gust of cold air that made everyone shiver, though no one moved. It was time. Soon, João Oliveira would be laid to rest. Larissa stood taller, wiping away the last of her tears. Her brother had been many things: a soldier, a protector, a friend. But most of all, he had been hers. The ache in her chest was a physical pain. But looking down at Rex, now sitting quietly by the coffin, she found the strength to breathe. He wasn't just Joao's partner. He was family. Chaplain Carlos cleared his throat and stepped forward. His voice, steady but filled with emotion, carried through the chapel. We are gathered here today not only to honor the service of Soldier João Oliveira, but to remember the man he was. Brave, loyal, and above all, selfless. He paused, his gaze resting on the folded flag atop the casket. He gave his life for others, not out of obligation, but by choice. The soldiers and attendees stood in rigid formation, but their eyes betrayed unshed tears and tightly clenched jaws. They had fought alongside João, had seen him risk everything without a second thought, and now they had to say goodbye. Soon, the sharp echo of the honor guard's footsteps resonated across the polished floor as they advanced with deliberate care, reaching for the flag that draped the casket. The perfect folds and the silent gesture were part of a ritual performed countless times, yet today, it felt different. João was not just another fallen soldier. He was theirs. As the flag was lifted, Rex let out a low, almost imperceptible whimper that nonetheless reverberated through the room. Larissa drew a sharp breath, feeling the fabric of her dress strain, as if Rex were speaking a truth she could not. An officer knelt before Larissa, holding the gloved flag with reverence. His voice was firm, yet kind. On behalf of a grateful nation, our military, and a thankful people, please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your loved one's honorable and faithful service. With trembling hands, Larissa received the flag, clutching it to her chest. It was not heavy, but it carried an immense weight, a final gift, a definitive goodbye. Then, the first crack of the 21-gun salute shattered the silence, each blast cutting the air like a percussive heartbeat. Outside, the soldiers fired in perfect synchrony, their faces impassive, their movements coordinated. Larissa flinched with every shot, but Rex remained motionless, his eyes fixed on the casket, ears pricked as if still standing his final watch. Afterward, a single haunting sound broke the stillness. A bugler stepped forward, pressed the trumpet to his lips, and began to play taps. The slow, mournful melody filled the chapel, each note a deliberate press against the hearts of everyone present. Rex's head lowered, his ears drooped, and his once tense body seemed to deflate as the final notes faded away. In that moment, Rex did something unexpected. He lay down beside the casket, pressing his body close to João's, and let out a deep sigh. Not of sorrow, but of resignation. The final echoes of taps faded into the cold air, leaving behind a silence so dense it was almost suffocating. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the wind outside seemed to have ceased, as if the entire world had paused to mourn the loss of João Oliveira. Rex remained beside the casket, pressed against it, as if refusing to let go. His breathing was calm and steady, though a distant sadness lingered in his eyes. Trained to fight, to protect, to always be at his handler's side, he now had no orders, no mission. There was only a vast, unending emptiness. Larissa sat, holding the flag tightly against her chest. It still held the warmth of the soldier who had handed it to her, but that warmth was already beginning to fade. Her fingers trembled as she traced the perfect folds, her throat tightening with the weight of reality. João was gone forever. There would be no more surprise calls, no letters from overseas. There was only the flag, the funeral, and the unbearable absence of her brother. Sergeant Marcos stepped forward, his normally steady voice now thick with grief. "We need to get Rex outside," he murmured, looking toward the chaplain. "The service is almost over." Larissa looked at Rex, who had remained curled beside the casket since taps had ended. Gently, she reached out a hand and whispered, "Rex." Her voice was barely audible, and the dog did not react. Sergeant Marcos knelt beside him, his movements slow and careful. "Come on, buddy," he said softly. "It's time." Finally, Rex stirred, not with obedience, but with a deep reluctance. Slowly, almost painfully, he lifted his head, his ears swiveling as if listening to something only he could hear. After one last gentle nudge against the casket, Rex rose to his feet. A collective sigh of relief went through the chapel. But then Rex did something that made Larissa's heart stop. He stepped away from the casket, took 3 slow paces forward, and then suddenly turned back, ears alert, his tail giving a single, hopeful wag, as if he had just seen something, or heard his name called. Larissa held her breath. Sergeant Marcos's brow furrowed in confusion. The chaplain murmured a quiet prayer. Rex stood there for another second, his brown eyes fixed on something unseen, and then, just as quickly as the moment had come, he lowered his head in acceptance and walked toward the chapel doors. A chill ran down Larissa's spine as she watched Rex at the entrance. For a fleeting moment, it was as if he had looked right at João. The doors creaked open, letting a draft of cold air sweep into the room. Rex moved slowly, his paws making little sound on the polished floor. As he crossed the threshold, a coldness washed over Larissa. The weight of the ceremony, of the loss, of the finality, was settling in. But there was something else in the air, something she couldn't explain. Clutching the flag tighter, she watched Rex hesitate just outside. He turned his head, not toward the attendees or the casket, but toward an empty space near the altar. His ears twitched, and his posture stiffened for a brief second. A subtle movement, but one Larissa noticed. So did Sergeant Marcos, who took a deep breath and muttered, "You saw that, didn't you?" Larissa could only nod, unable to speak. The chaplain, who had been silent since the end of taps, finally spoke, his voice filled with solemnity. "Sometimes, love doesn't leave so easily." His words sent a shiver through Larissa. She had never been one to believe in spirits or the supernatural, but the way Rex had looked back, his tail flickering in recognition, left her unsettled. Outside, the funeral procession was waiting. Soldiers stood in impeccable formation, their faces stoic, their hands clasped. The hearse gleamed in the afternoon sun, ready to carry João to his final resting place. It was time. The world was moving on, but Rex remained at the door, his deep eyes fixed on the empty chapel interior. Larissa could have sworn she saw a glint in them. perhaps of recognition, of longing, or even of peace. With one last sigh, Rex lowered his head and stepped into the daylight. Larissa followed, her heart pounding. She didn't know if what she had witnessed was real or just a trick of grief, but for an instant, it felt as though João had never truly left at all. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the cemetery as Larissa, still holding the flag, felt its weight increase with every step, as if the absence of her brother were settling into her very bones. The honor guard stood in silence, a solemn reminder of the duty and sacrifice that had bound them all together. Rex walked beside her, his pace slow but steady. His usual alert demeanor had softened. With his ears down and his tail still, it was clear he had followed João through war zones, through chaos and danger, and now he was following him one last time. The casket was lowered with precision into an open grave. The chaplain stepped forward, his voice steady despite the sorrow that hung heavy in the air. Private João Oliveira dedicated his life to service, he began. To his country, to his comrades, and to that unbreakable bond that exists between a man and his canine partner. His eyes softened as he looked at Rex. Even now, that bond remains. Larissa felt her throat tighten as the unmoving soldiers revealed a deep, shared pain. Sergeant Marcos stood with his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the casket, knowing that no matter how many funerals he attended, this one would never be easy. Then Rex did something that took Larissa's breath away. He walked to the edge of the grave, his nose sniffing the polished wood of the casket. His eyes filled with an understanding that went beyond sadness. He let out a soft sigh and then stood tall with pride. With a deliberate, practiced motion, he lifted his paw and placed it gently on the casket. The cemetery fell into a silence so profound it was absolute. The soldiers, who had maintained their composure until now, were wiping away tears. Larissa pressed her lips together to keep from crying out. Sergeant Marcos took a deep, shuddering breath, and even the chaplain paused to honor the moment. Rex stood there, motionless. It was not a plea, but a final act of loyalty. A last watch. A promise kept. Then, as silently as he had approached, Rex lowered his paw and stepped back, sitting at Larissa's feet, with his head held high, his body still. He had done his duty. He had said his goodbye. Larissa knelt to stroke his fur. In a quiet voice, she said, "Good boy." A soft breeze began to blow, rustling the grass and carrying with it the echoes of a life well lived. In that instant, Larissa swore she felt something, a warm sensation, a familiar presence that made itself known for a fleeting second beside them. But when she looked, there was nothing but the sound of the flag being presented to a grieving sister, the quiet strength of a dog who had lost his best friend, and the certainty that some bonds are never truly broken. The funeral was over. The soldiers had given their final salute. The flag had been carefully folded and delivered. The sound of departing footsteps echoed across the cemetery, leaving Larissa, Rex, and the weight of an ending no one was ready to accept. Larissa stood staring at the fresh mound of earth where her brother now rested. The world felt quieter, emptier. She had always known this day might come, but nothing could prepare her for its finality. At her side, Rex remained still, his eyes fixed on the headstone as if awaiting one last command. She knelt, stroking his fur, whispering through a choked voice, "He's not coming back, boy." Her words carried an immense sorrow, and Rex let out a long, slow sigh, his body finally beginning to relax. The pain was still there, thick and relentless, but something in him had shifted. He was no longer searching, no longer waiting. He was simply remembering. Larissa closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound of the wind in the trees fill the void. She remembered João, his laugh, his stubbornness, the way he always made her feel safe, no matter how far away he was. She remembered how Rex had looked back into the chapel, how he had stood watch by the casket, and how he had gently placed his paw upon it, as if to say, "I was here. I am yours." A tear slid down her cheek, but this time it wasn't just sadness. It was the feeling that love, even in death, does not fade, that perhaps some souls remain close, watching over us, protecting us. Suddenly, Rex lifted his head, his ears twitching for a moment as he stared at the empty space beside Joao's grave. His tail gave a soft, gentle wag before he rose to his feet with a newfound steadiness. Larissa let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding and gently petted him. "Let's go, boy," she murmured. And just like that, after only a second's pause, Rex followed her. His steps were lighter now, his head held a little higher. After a lifetime of following João, for the first time, he was walking on his own. But as they walked away, Larissa couldn't shake the feeling that for a brief moment there had been a presence beside them, a silent farewell, or perhaps the promise of a reunion. Some bonds, she realized, are never broken. Rex's loyalty and Joao's sacrifice would live on forever. If this story touched your heart, leave a like to honor this bond and share in the comments if you have ever witnessed a love that transcends life itself.